Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Be Freaking Awesome. I'm one of your hosts, Sami Kinnison, here with Angela Belford, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Jessica Formicola. Jessica, do you want to just give us a little bit of a brief introduction of who you are for everyone listening?
Sure. My name is Jessica Formicola. I am a chef for all intents and purposes. I do recipe development for national food brands. I write for larger publications. I have a couple websites of my own, and I also do a fair amount of TV and cooking on TV and podcasts and radio interviews. All about food, always about food.
Today, what I think will be interesting is that it's a little less about food and a little more about sort of entrepreneurialism and mom guilt that, well, I don't know that it's only going to be about mom guilt, but like that's the nugget we're going to start with and go from there. And what is it like to be, in all of this space and pursuing all sorts of great things, but also balancing kids and family and all the things that come with that. I super excited to just jump right in.
I think that Jessica's background story of going from psychologist, behavioral health to chef is a pretty compelling story. So will you go ahead and share that with us?
Sure. So I am not professionally trained as a chef. I did not start in culinary. I went to school to be a psychotherapist, and that's what I did. I was a psychotherapist and a college professor for 12 years before I started delving into the food world. I worked with some pretty advanced cases. Most of my patients were dual diagnosis. They had a substance use disorder as well as an additional mental health disorder. And I also taught college students, which, comes with its own ups and downs too, especially freshman and sophomore year, which was typically the courses I was teaching. And then I also worked in prisons with sex offenders, which obviously was emotionally taxing as well. So I loved what I did. I've always loved being on the go. I've loved being really busy. My husband and I got married, and we don't have any family where we live. We live in Baltimore, but we come from big Italian families that always did family dinners. And all of our friends were also transplants to the area. So we decided that we'd start hosting family dinners on Sundays to bring back that aspect. And I love to cook. So it was my time to try out new recipes, to tinker around in the kitchen and kind of float around with a glass of wine and try out new stuff on them. And luckily they're good guinea pigs. So people would start asking for the recipes, and I never really had them because I never actually follow a recipe, which is funny now that I'm, a creator of recipes, but I didn't. So I started to write things down, and it was much easier for me to have a central place for them to look for them instead of me individually sending them out in emails and people losing them. So one day when a patient no-showed at my work for their appointment, I Googled how to start a blog. I had no idea there were other food blogs out there. And at the time, this is now almost 13 years ago, food blogs weren't what they are today. They weren't professionally done. It was, somebody just behind a computer screen kind of sharing random thoughts and maybe a recipe for taco pasta salad. But it wasn't really about cooking and culinary, and it wasn't deep. It was just a recipe with maybe a point and shoot camera image. They certainly weren't monetized. People weren't making livings off of them yet. And I had no idea that they existed. Mine was quite literally just a recipe written down on a blank page so that my friends and family could find them. And then one day I realized that more than just my friends and family were looking at them. I distinctly remember walking into our old house and telling my husband that 30 people had looked at my blog that day. 30 people, and people that I didn't know. Like it was crazy to me, mind blown. And it upped the bar. I decided that it was a lot of fun and that I could take this a little bit further. And I didn't even have social media then. Instagram wasn't even a thing yet then. It was maybe Facebook and Twitter, right? It was like so long ago. And it's really been a fun evolution to do this at the same time as practicing. For a long time, I was pretty anonymous because I didn't want my patients or my students to find me and this other part of me. Part of being a psychotherapist is being a blank slate, and it felt very weird for them to know that side of me, and they always were very curious, which was fine when they did start finding out, and they did start finding out because I appeared on a news show one morning thinking no one will see this, and everybody saw this. But it was an interesting transition. So I continued to do both. We didn't have any kids. It was just me and him, and it wasn't my full-time job. We started making a little bit of money from it on the side. Ads had gotten introduced into web pages where you could put advertisements onto your own personal web pages. And I started working with brands, and they would pay me what now is, very small sums. My first job, I got paid in free jelly. Um, but you started making a little bit of money, but it was fun money. It was our adventure money and go on new trips money and that kind of a thing. But part of it was also cathartic for me because we were going through fertility treatment. So it took us 7 years to have my first child, my daughter. And we did 16 rounds of IUI, IVF, and ultimately my children are both born from egg donors. We had, like I said, 16 rounds. We had 5 miscarriages in that time. There was a lot of other things that happened, mentally, emotionally, physically, that were just really, really exhausting. And I needed an outlet that didn't have to do with my day job. Most TV shows have some psychological component to them, right? So like that wasn't a good escape for me. And I always loved going to the gym too, but I wasn't allowed to exercise and work out the way that I like to while going into treatment cycles.
Mm.
So cooking and writing ended up being my outlet. I can get my mind off this. I don't have to think about this. I can silo it, compartmentalize, and this is my happy place right now. And it just started snowballing. And by the time we were able to have a kid, my daughter Vivian was being born. I wanted nothing more in this world than to be a stay-at-home mom with her. And having this kind of part-time side gig gave me the ability to do that. So I quit my job at the hospital. I stopped teaching. I quit my job. I'd quit my job at the prison long before that, but I just decided to stay home. And from there is another evolution of where I've ended up. But that's how I'm here full time and not practicing anymore, although I still hold my license. And I've been able to make a lot of connections between the two professions, which very superficially seem unrelated, but
Mm,
are actually really related and parallel,
sure.
at least how I frame cooking and how I'm trying to help others in the kitchen. There definitely are a lot of connections there.
Yeah, I love the the story of just how your side hustle. So many of us start these little side passion projects, and then we have no idea that at some point in time it becomes kind of our lifeline. Really, like you started it as just like, oh, we need community. Let's start a family dinner. I was just in my mind thinking, oh, we may have to actually have a playlist on our podcast of Italian family episodes because this is not the first one. I'm like, oh man, I want you to meet Anthony Bonrito because
Oh,
family is such a big part. I think we could learn a lot
hmm.
about Italian families. And anyway, so I love all of those things, but you get to where you're full time and you get your dream and it's magical and it's exactly what you had hoped for, right? Isn't that what happens when we all become stay-at-home moms?
Right, right. Yes, my full-time
For
job,
everybody
if you
that
mean
just
full-time
paused.
job as a stay-at-home mom, yes. I mean, at this time, I really in my head thought I was a part-time food blogger. I was just kind of doing it on the side to, help make ends meet with my husband being the full-time income earner at home. But I realized really quick I wasn't really good at being a stay-at-home mom. I laugh now, but this is many years of self-reflection and telling myself it's okay and patting myself on the back. I liked to be busy and you are definitely busy as a mom. There is no joke, but it is hard and it is also taxing in a different way. And I found myself like not being able to wait until nap time so that I could work. and wanting to work after she went to bed and waking up early to work. And I really struggled to find the balance between my own self-care. Like I'd go to yoga every day at the gym, bring her, she'd go to the kids zone, that kind of stuff. And being a mom and being a stay-at-home parent and making sure that I was enriching her enough. I mean, at this point, she was like 4 months old. So really, what kind of, enriching are we doing? But still, I'm thinking I'm going to have genius baby and we're practicing our colors and our numbers and, and work. And I really was so dedicated to work and there wasn't much of a balance and I siloed these things. So they didn't bleed into each other. Really, it was just this and this. And my husband told me, he's like, listen, if you want to take this to the next level, you can't do it on a part-time job. Like you can't. And he really encouraged me to find some help with my daughter Vivian. And so I agreed begrudgingly. And I look back now and I realize that part of this is me wanting to be superwoman. I wanted to do everything. And I thought I could have basically 2 full-time jobs, that's what it is. If you're a parent and you work full-time, you have 2 full-time jobs. The problem is doing them both at home and trying to do them simultaneously is really challenging. And when she was little, it was easy. They sleep a lot, they poop, but they don't really, they're not mobile yet. So I got a part-time nanny about maybe 10, 12 hours a week that would watch Viv for me and magically saw how the more that work I put in, the more my revenue was increasing. And soon I was able to start hiring help. So a part-time social media assistant, I started bringing on more and more and more hours, and she's now a full-time employee. But it was this slow evolution, and every step of the way, I had a lot of mom guilt of I'm making this choice to work instead of be with my child, and I have a choice. There's so many people out there that don't have that option. And I was very lucky and blessed to have that option. And now I'm making a choice to work. And ultimately, I had to kind of put on my own therapy hat. And I started realizing that on the days I had my nanny, even if it was for 6 hours or 4 hours or just part-time, I was a better mom to Vivian after that. After I had my time to be an adult and to, do things and work that other muscle in my brain and not be constant 100% mommy all the time. My patience was better. My focus was better because now all these other things on my to-do list were done and I didn't have to worry about them. And I was able to really spend better quality time with her than I was previously trying to pack it all in. And that's really what it came down to. It was quality time versus quantity of time. And I stayed with that part-time schedule for a long time, especially when my next child was born. So we kind of side note, we knew we wanted to have more than one kid, but we're also older now. We didn't get married till we were in our 30s, and we've had 7 years of fertility treatment. And I love the term advanced maternal age. I was advancing fast, according to them. And they're like, if you want to do this, get on it. So the earliest that they'd transfer another embryo was when my daughter turned 1. So quite literally the day after her first birthday, we transferred an embryo. And much to our surprise, the first one took, because the first, I didn't know if I had 7 years left in me. I wasn't going to put a time limit on it. I wasn't going to put a number on it, but I didn't think I had 7 years and 16 rounds left in my soul to do this. So he worked the first time around. So now my kids are 18 months apart, and I'm still now trying to juggle 2 kids and a part-time nanny and this job that is now almost full-time.
Yeah. And so I want to pause. So much gold to ferret out there and to mine. Sami, you've wrestled with this working, staying home thing recently as well, since your kids are 4 and 1. Why don't you share a little bit more about kind of your journey on that process and how you've gotten to where you are today?
What's interesting is, so my jump into stay-at-home momhood, I don't really know what that season of my life where I was staying at home was pretty sudden and unexpected. We had a pretty bad incident happen at my son's daycare while I was pregnant with our second. And I had just a crazy hard pregnancy with Peter. I ended up getting COVID pneumonia. I was almost hospitalized. It was brutal. And I felt like I had no energy for a very long time. The first half of my pregnancy, I just was throwing up so much that I lost 20 pounds. So by the time I was at 4.5 months pregnant, I was 20 pounds less than what I had weighed starting pregnancy, which is like not the direction you're supposed to go when you're growing a human. To me, it just speaks to how depleted and drained I really was at the time. And then very dramatic incident at his school where I don't feel like things were handled appropriately. And it became pretty clear that my son is not going to be taken care of well and safely in this environment. And so we made the decision to just take him out of school immediately. If anybody listening has kids in America at this time, like childcare is not immediately available for people. Like it is a huge problem. And to take him out of a situation where it was unsafe meant that I was on a wait list for 6 months before he could go into the next place. And so thankfully I had very understanding bosses, my mom, who basically I went on maternity leave early while I was pregnant and then stayed at home he was 3 at the time, I think. I don't know, math is hard on that one. I think he was 3-ish at the time. I stayed at home with him for 3 months before Peter was born. And then that summer was at home with both of them, but had a nanny who came, and she was full-time nanny all summer long. Not only did she take care of the 3-year-old, she also like in some ways took care of me. I just like really appreciated. She would just be like, hey, do you have laundry that needs to be done? Or like, why don't I take the baby? You go take a nap. And I was just like, I think I cried a lot to her. I was like, I just love you. Can you please move in and I'll just take care of you forever.
I teased her that you had hired a wife.
Yes. It felt like it. It really
It's
did
real
feel like
life,
I hired a
though.
wife. But then at a certain point, so after the 6-month waiting period was up, for the wait list, we did put our 3-year-old into a Montessori school, but I decided to still stay at home with our baby and work part-time and stay at home with him. I didn't have that opportunity with Henry financially. And this time I did have more options. And it was really good for a while until it wasn't. And then it was like,
until it wasn't. Yeah.
And then it was like, now he's awake more. And now I'm more into my work. I came back to work with a new job description that I was way more passionate about, something I was really eager to develop. But I didn't. And then it was like, okay, but I also want to take care of this kid. And anyway, yeah. So I feel like I had very similar story, Jessica, of just like, you want to stay home. And also then you get into the work and you're like, but this is also really good too. My husband pressed on me very hard. He was like, are you sure you want to stay at home? I don't know this is a good idea. You're so driven, Sami. You're so goal oriented. You like to do things. What do you mean you're going to stay at home with our kids? Like, I feel like you're just going to become really unhappy. And I was like, look, we're going to make this decision for right now. And I am confident enough in myself to say that if it's not working out, we can change the decision later. But right now, let's make the decision. Also, whenever we took our son out of daycare, I was like, I don't know what other option we have right now. Someone has to watch our child. And clearly it's not working out at the school that he's at right now. So I don't regret any of that time that I had. I think it was all wonderful and precious and incredible. And Peter just turned 1 last week. And I am also really grateful for the season we're in now, where I work full time and they both go to school full time. And it's also really good. It does lead to, I don't know, when you have less time, I really make the most of it.
100%. I also realized, and maybe you too, especially with the Montessori school, we're at like a small church preschool, but I realized after my daughter started going, and so when we lived in, let me dial back a little bit. We lived in Baltimore City and we bought a house out in the country, and we moved when my son was like 6 weeks old. And at that point in time, I didn't have a nanny anymore. My nanny was an older lady that lived in the city near us, and she was not going to drive out to where we were. So I was still now trying to like navigate a new system. But my daughter turned 2 right after we moved in here. This was like a 3-month period where I was full time to 2 kids, but still had the job. And she started at this preschool, and she only went part time because, again, I still felt like, oh, part time's fine. Like we can still do this part time. And then I started realizing that it was actually harder on her to go part time than it was full time because she didn't know what day of the week it was. So she couldn't figure out what her routine was. And kids are just better with routine, but also the stuff they were teaching her. I'm a pretty creative person, but I'm not necessarily sure that I was going to dedicate an entire week to talking about apples, and how apples grow and what are the things we can do with apples and the color of apples and the taste. And she did a taste test with apples. Like I work in food, and I would have never thought to like set my child down and give her 6 apples and then have her use adjectives to describe them. Like it just was, these tasks. And I told my husband, I'm like, I feel like maybe part of this is when I was growing up in the early 80s, it was stay-at-home mom was more the regular, right? And or the preferred. And kids only went to daycare if the family didn't needed 2 incomes. Like you only went if your family really needed 2 incomes. And it was just the norm for moms to stay home. And maybe you went to preschool 1 or 2 mornings a week, but it was really nursery school. It was singing and crafts. It wasn't learning. And it's changed a lot now.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize that my kids would probably be less prepared for kindergarten at this point if they don't go to a preschool / daycare. And I'm right. My daughter is going into kindergarten now, and there are some kids in her cohort that can't write their own names or don't know their letters. And my daughter is doing double-digit math. So it's a very big jump of these stay-at-home kids, and not all. There are some really great stay-at-home moms. I realized I was not going to be that person to have that kind of patience to do these
Right.
things. And it's great that they go there. But we also kind of got thrown into full-time nanny during COVID. Our
Mhm.
part-time nanny that I ended up hiring for my son here, she worked at my gym in the kids' like daycare room at the gym when I'd go to yoga. And when COVID happened, kind of laughable now, like we're going to close everything down for 2 weeks. She didn't have a job for 2 weeks. And there were still these open-ended questions of like how people were going to make ends meet. And I said, hey, listen, maybe we could just kind of scratch each other's back. Like I can afford to like pay you for 2 weeks worth of full-time work if you want to come to our house for 2 weeks. And I have a couple projects on my end that I can finally wrap up that are totally unraveling. And, 2 weeks turned into 4 weeks, it turned into 6 weeks, it turned into however many years. So she ended up staying with us. And I realized again, like exponentially, how much more income I could make if I had more time to dedicate to it. And now she actually works for me on the Savory Experiment side. She's one of my social media managers and helps me with video production. So she's stayed on. It's been like this. But my kids, I made a hard choice when our preschool didn't allow kids until they were 2. So my daughter, when they reopened, went back, and my son stayed home with her. Her name is Holly. And when my son turned 2, we had to make the really hard decision of sending him to school or keeping him home with Holly. And we more so we didn't want to lose Holly. Holly for me was very much like yours. She'd like mop the kitchen floor, and I'd get off a call and be like, oh my God, you did the dishes. You folded the laundry. Like it was much more. And our relationship had grown, especially going through COVID together. We basically all lived together and did our grocery shopping together just so we could keep everybody safe together. So she
Mm-hmm.
became a part of our family in the making of that. So for me, it was like, if my kid goes to school, I'm going to lose Holly. And we figured out a way to not lose Holly and let the kids go to school and really thrive and grow and learn these things that I don't think we'd be getting at home otherwise. And just socialization.
Mm-hmm.
Like secure attachment and knowing that they're safe in other places and mommy and daddy will be back for you. And
Okay, I
that's
was
huge.
hoping you opened that door because I have a couple of thoughts. Number one is that In certain subcultures, it used to be the norm to stay at home. And in some subcultures, we live in the South and we're part of a faith community. It's still a lot of pressure to want to be a stay at home mom. And the idea that you want to be, I can remember, and I'm older than you guys, but not ridiculously lots. But when the kids were like teenagers, I had a job where I was traveling like all the time. And some of the sweet ladies in my Bible study would be like, "Oh my gosh, how does your family handle it?" And I go, "I literally don't know what you mean. Like, I need you to rephrase the question." They were like, "Oh, well, how can they?" And I was like, "No, no, no. My children get worried if I'm the one that like if dad travels for a soccer tournament 3 or 4 weekends in a row, they get real nervous because mom forgets to feed them. Like this
No,
is not
real
yeah,
story. There was
real
one weekend
story."
when I was a teenager and it was just me and her at home, and she bought a bag of rolls from the store and said, for breakfast, you can have a roll with honey and butter. For lunch, you can have a roll with some lunch meat. And for dinner, I don't know, I guess you could have like 2 rolls or something. Like literally, that was her plan for the weekend, was for us to just eat bread and
No, we
various
went out.
toppings.
I also bought you ice cream. We went to McDonald's and got a little
Totally
Sunday.
well balanced.
I
I
was
don't understand
actually
what the problem
Saturday
is.
evening, and she goes, "Mom, I have to have more food. I have to
I'm
have real
so
food."
hungry.
And
And
I'm
But
like,
it
I
still
okay, I got
exists
really
though.
self-sufficient. I got
yeah.
very self-sufficient at
Yeah,
making my
really,
own
really
food.
crafty in the kitchen and the
Oh,
the
and
the
the
pantry.
thing, but that was the thing is like they were like, "Oh, I have to if I go out of town, I have to plan all these things." And I'm like, wonder if my husband plans all that stuff because he
Yeah,
certainly doesn't put a casserole in the freezer for me. Like he
it
assumes
still
I'm
exists though.
self-sufficient.
It still
It
exists. I mean,
still
there's part of
exists,
me
and so
that
I want people to hear it's okay if you
mhm,
don't want to be home with your kids. It's
it
okay.
is. And I think that there's also a difference between wants and needs and have tos. Like if I'm going to
Yes.
work and have a job, there are some times when I have to be gone. I mean, recently my son had a really bad croup attack that landed him in the emergency room. This was on a Wednesday night. And generally, anybody who's had a child with croup, they get some steroids in them and they're like back to full force within 12 hours. They're fine within 12 hours. This one was just particularly scary. Maybe it was on a Tuesday. I had to travel for work on Friday to an event in New York, and I did. And I posted like on my Instagram feed because part of, being doing what I do now is my life is in the public eye, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. But I also get criticized in the public eye. I had so many notes coming to me of what was I thinking leaving my son who's sick at home. And all I could think of is if I was a man, would you be asking me the same question? If I was a man and would you be saying, "Well, your son's sick, why aren't you at home?" First of all, my husband is 100% capable of taking care of my child if he was sick without my help and assistance and guidance. But second of all, he was fine too. It was like, if my child was still in the hospital, no, no, I wouldn't have gone. But like I can make that that choice. I also had, well, there was a couple of things that happened all in a row. It was that and traveling. Oh, my daughter had what they called kindergarten roundup, which is basically just a fancy way to say you're dropping off forms. There's no rounding up, there's no official things going on. They do not give you any information about what's about to happen in the year. They just need to physically put their hands on the forms. And I sent my husband instead of me. And that I posted a picture because everybody knew I was out of town for work. And I said, so proud of my new little kindergartner. And there was this flurry of people that were very angry that I was not present to drop off forms. I filled out the forms. Doesn't that count? Like gathered all the information, but it's still very present. And again, this disbelief that my husband could possibly drop off forms by himself without my guidance was just laughable. But I also think it's good for our kids. I'm glad my daughter knows I work. She calls me a cooker. What did your mom do? She's a cooker. So but she understands and she's not upset when I leave. And she, talks to me while I'm gone. And I feel like I'm setting, as a strong female and an entrepreneur, that I'm setting a good example for her, that you can be a wife and you can be a mom and you can be a business owner and you can do all of those things really well. It's okay. That's, your life and yourself are multifaceted and there's a lot of different hats, and there's no reason why you can't have it all. You can.
This morning, I fell victim to this line of thinking that like mom has to take care of it all. Literally, today is when this happened. My son's, he turned 1 last week. And so we were out of town and he had his 1-year appointment today. I forgot about it. Well, I had a different scheduling conflicts and I was trying to figure this out. And I was like, oh, and I left my laptop here. And how does this work out? And I was talking with my husband through the logistics. And he was like, why don't I just take him? And I was like, wait, what? Like, it caught me off guard. He was like, it sounds like you're having to jump through like 18 hoops to figure out how to make everything work. Can't I just take him to the doctor's appointment? And I was like, you absolutely can. I don't even know why that didn't cross my mind. Like, yes, please, you take him. I'll go do other things and I don't have to worry about it. And so he went and he took him. He called me afterwards the same way that I call him whenever I've taken other doctor's appointments. It'll be like, hey, here's how our kid's doing. And he said, yep, our kid's doing great. He still hates shots. That's pretty normal. And, I was just like, oh, I was the one who was putting him in the box that you can't take care of our kid and you can't take the doctor's appointment. And I didn't even realize it at first until he just was like, you seem like you're doing a lot of mental gymnastics and there's a very obvious answer in front of you. And I was like, thank you. I'm grateful that I have a partner who
thank
points
goodness
it out.
for modern relationships, right? And that's
Right.
so nice that he did that. I still do things like in my head, I rephrase it as setting my husband up for success. Like, I was going to France for a week and I didn't make meals ahead of time, but I did make sure that there were a couple of easy things and frozen pizzas available for nights when, juggling becomes hard. Like, kids have gymnastics and there's multiple things going on. And it does, even when I'm the parent staying home, become a little bit more challenging without having 2 people and 2 carpools running to get it all done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's a difference between, I doubt he travels way less than I do, and it's usually only for a night. I don't think that he'd set me up for success in the same way, but I also know that if his life is easier, my life is easier. So it's not that hard, and I just think that's a kind thing to do, not necessarily a mom thing to do. I guess is how I think of it.
Well,
but
and I think it would be different. Like, if something happened and you weren't able to do that, your husband's not going to fall apart. Your kids are not going to, like, not everything is going to fall to pieces. There's a difference.
No.
Like, when I have extra capacity, by all means, I want to help set things up well and do what I can. And if you were on back-to-back trips or something else had happened, he's not going to be calling you saying, now, what do the kids eat? Do they have any food allergies? Somebody bumped their head. What's the medicine dosage? Like, those are the kinds of things.
Yeah. I would say that, Sami, you've actually because your husband travels for work. And so you single mom a lot of weeknights, or plenty of weeknights. And so you've had a couple of things that you've done to make your own life easier that I'm like, oh, why didn't I think of that? For like meal choices and stuff. Do you want to share that? What's worked for you? Or
give me some examples. You share
McDonald's.
No.
I was like, I do a lot of like frozen meals.
Like, I thought you had said these are the 3 when Chris is out of town. These are the 3 meals we have. Period. The end. Like, we always have goulash. You picked a couple of meals that he doesn't like, and so you always keep those on hand. Like, when he's out of town, I don't have to worry about it. I'm going to make these things, and I don't ever have to think about what's for dinner.
Anyway. I think I did that a lot more when he has traveled significantly less lately, which is why it's not fresh on my mind.
Oh, I see.
But yes, he is going to start traveling some more. And I was like, ooh, I have been really craving a goulash because he hates it.
He doesn't like goulash. Who doesn't like goulash?
I know. Well, he doesn't like
beefy macaroni.
Exactly. No, he doesn't like his foods like touching. He's like, no, I'd like to have my separate foods. And I'm like, no, like take it all together.
Carrots, peas, chicken, pasta.
That's exactly right. And so when I'm like, no, just take it all and mix it in the big bowl, add some like cheese or I don't know, whatever I'm feeling this day. I might mix it up a little bit. He's like, no, thank you. It's crazy. Anyway, well, whatever. I make it. The kids love it. I love it. So when he's out of town, we don't cook it with him, and he travels
It's
enough.
goulash night.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and what I like is also you do goulash night. It's whatever is in the pantry some of the time, like
Yep.
sure that things were
Clean
gonna
out the
dump in
vegetable
there.
crisper.
Yeah.
There's
Exactly.
zucchini in our goulash.
Okay, so what advice would you guys give to moms that are wrestling with this idea of mom guilt? They love their jobs and they feel maybe pressure. A lot of people feel pressure from like older female family members and their community. What tips would you guys give them?
I'd say to connect with other like-minded people. I feel like you can really lift each other up. I'm definitely part of a mom's group. I'm part of a book club. I have my yoga friends. I still have my self-care on top of all of this, which sometimes I do feel a little guilty about, that I take time out to go do stuff for myself. And I try hard to do it kind of outside of, I would say, working mom hours. Like I go to Orange Theory at 5 a.m. so that I can be back home
Yeah.
by the time my kids are waking up, so that it doesn't take away from stuff. But it having like-minded people around you to encourage you and continue to validate that you're making the right decision, not only for yourself, but for your children and your marriage or your relationship or your partner and your family, because also, relying too much on family can also create issues and difficulties and challenges. Having that person there to validate that you're making the right choices is paramount.
I think for me, what I would encourage is, one, what advice would you be giving your best friend who's saying, I feel like I'm a bad mom because I'm going back to work? Would you look her in the eye and say, you're absolutely right. You're the worst mom that
Yeah,
exists?
horrible.
Like, why do we tell ourselves this when we would never believe it about somebody else? And we don't have to be the best everything. I think that, like, I'm not a great engineer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not so many things. I think it's okay that I'm not a really good early childhood educator. I think it's okay that I trust other people to be early childhood educators and other things. And that's okay. Like, that's fine. That's not a value statement on you because you are not proficient at every profession that exists out there. So why do you feel like you have to be proficient? And proficient is maybe not the right word, but you don't have to fill that exact spot in the home
An
as well.
expert. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a great point. I mean, like if my toilet breaks, I can hire an expert or watch YouTube. Generally,
Right.
I'm going to hire the expert, So
And
it's
by
same
all
thing.
means, we could educate our kids. I could stay at home and teach them how to tie their shoes and do all the things. And that's going to take me a whole lot more brain power than somebody who already is an expert in this. And it's not to say that I can't. I'll say that my kids, need other things. During my stay-at-home time, I also was like, I'm going to teach you emotional well-being. You are not going to learn letters and numbers from me, but I can teach you how to identify some emotions and be like, how are we feeling today? It sounds like we're feeling really mad. I can tell this must be some big emotions because you threw a toy across the room. Let's talk about boundaries. Like, I could do those things with you, but I'm not going to teach you letters, and that's okay for somebody else to take that job.
Well, you know
Let's
what? You're
also
better than me, because my morning would start with that and end with me starting to lose my own emotion. It always
Oh,
started off really well. Choices, and we don't say the word no, and how can we make this better? And how are you feeling? And like by 5 p.m., I'm like, because I said so. That's why. Because I
yeah.
said so.
I remember the first time when it was like, you're really angry, but we can't do this thing. It was like, what can I do? And I'm like, oh gosh, that's a really good question. What do we do when we're angry? Because I have no idea what we can do when
Yeah.
we're angry, like for myself. So that was like a really good learning process. Be like, okay, well, let's learn together. What can we do when we're mad that is a safe, healthy expression of our anger? I will learn with you, child. This is great. We will
Side
reparent
note, there's
ourselves.
a really good set of books called A Little Spot of Emotion, and they have all the
oh
different emotions, and I love
those.
those. My kids love those books.
They're so good. We should definitely link that in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah.
The other question I have is there are people who I am not I don't like working. I didn't like working.
Mhm.
I was put on this earth to nurture and to be a mom. And I'm in a community where it feels like everybody works and I feel less than because I don't work and I like being home with my kids. What would you tell these moms?
If they're happy, that's fine. I mean, really, this all just comes down to everybody being happy and healthy, right? And it's okay to not want to work either. If that is your calling. It was kind of like you talking Sammy about being an expert in something. If your calling is to be a nurturing mother, go for it. Not everybody's cut out from the same cloth, and that's what makes us so interesting and wonderful and exciting to talk to. And that's fine too. It's all fine. Just has to do with your personality.
Mhm.
Nothing's easy to navigate. Nothing.
I have, you have not called this specifically up, but I have some advice for men,
I was getting there.
partners.
Yep, that
Oh,
was the
okay.
next one. Nope, that's
Yeah.
okay. Keep going.
I pay attention. Number one, like you've got to tune in. You've got to tune into what's going on in your life. And even if you think that you're carrying an equal load, ask, do you ask your partner, hey, if I'm carrying an equal load? Um, and not to say that they have to be the project manager that delegates tasks to you, but you can have an honest conversation about where things lie and how they
Mhm.
are doing. Because when you think you might be carrying the equal load, you'd be curious to see if everybody else perceives it in the same way. And find ways to show up more. Stop taking the easy road out and saying, well, somebody else is handling it, so I don't have to. So,
Mhm.
I read a book that where a guy was writing and saying he thought that he was carrying the load. It's called Indistractable, and he asked his wife this question, and she laughed at him. She absolutely laughed, and he was like, "No, no, no, but I'm doing." And so what he ended up, he's like, "I want to be better." So he did a couple of things. One night on their date night, they wrote down all of the domestic tasks that were related and who was assigned to it. And what he discovered is that he was carrying half of the physical load, but she was carrying about 90% of the mental load. So when you say
Mhm.
project manager, figuring out who needs to go what and whose responsibility it is and who's given medicine and all of those things. And so
Social calendar.
guys, yes, guys, I would
mm,
encourage you
Mhm.
to like how can you keep track of that? I remember when we had two in competitive soccer, I just was like that you're responsible for all the logistics of those two teams. Like
Mhm.
we have to book hotels, we have to book travel, we have to do all those things. Like I'm going to do the school stuff, you do those, that's all you. And but look at the mental load also that you're carrying with your partner as well.
100%. That too, I mean, coming from my background in therapy is sometimes easier said than done. I think there's a lot of people out there that are gonna unfortunately not have a partner that's willing to discuss those things and look at those things, and that's really hard too, because it doesn't mean, no, I'd say very rarely are relationships 50-50. I think very rarely are loads carried equally. There's
Sure.
always going to be an imbalance, but again, just because that's what works for us doesn't mean that that's gonna work for somebody else in their relationship or how they've chosen to live.
This is
yeah.
fantastic. Jessica, any closing thoughts for the audience?
Be freaking awesome.
Yay! Man, we should script that.
That was not scripted, everybody. That was not scripted. Totally impromptu over here. Ad libbing.
Thanks
No,
for
I
being on
just say
brand.
make sure you're happy. We only, for most of us, we believe that we have one life here. And sometimes you have to be selfish about your own life and realize that to be the best you can be with all your other hats on, you need to make yourself happy first and foremost.
Mhm. That's fantastic.
That's great. Where can people find you, Jessica? What are you up to these days?
Oh, I'm all over the place. But everything can be located on our main website, which is savoryexperiments.com. And from there, you can find our other websites and all of our social media places and all the things we're doing from cookbooks. I actually have a TV show coming out on June 27th All of these things can be found on our social media channels. And you can email me there or email me directly, jessica@savoryexperiments.com. And I have a staff, but it's always me. I'm always still behind everything, making sure that we stay authentic and genuine to our readers and our followers. And we call everybody foodie friends, to our foodie friends.
I
I
love it.
love this. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We hope that you have taken something from this conversation, even if you aren't a mom. You probably know a mom, or at minimum, you have a mom. And we just really hope you guys can take something from this. For now, we hope you guys go and be freaking awesome.